Hello, hi. So, welcome back. Day 21 of VEDA. And I thought about, so this video is going to kind of serve as a primer. I was on the fence. I wanted to talk about the new series Lovecraft Country that comes on HBO. I was already going to watch it. It was less about whether I was going to watch it or whether I was going to talk about it. I assumed, which is an assumption that people make that people probably should stop making, that there will probably be a lot of people covering it and talking about it. And there are people talking about it, but not a bunch. But also, I've just noticed that I'm noticing the conversation that I'm seeing is taking a decidedly pop culture approach to it and less of a horror approach. So as a horror fan, I saw a lot in watching it and really would just want to kind of dive into the series and the symbolism and all of that good stuff just because it's something I enjoy. So I'm gonna do it. But before I start talking about it, I wanted to kind of do a primer and talk about the namesake of the show. And so it's called Lovecraft Country, and it is named for an I don't know, 1934. So early 1900s writer named H.P. Lovecraft, named Howard Phillips Lovecraft, or H.P. Lovecraft as he was his pen name. And so he was born in 1890 and he died in 1937, and he wrote what was called weird fiction and horror fiction. And so horror as a genre is new-ish. Like, there was a time, and even now there's still some people who kind of look down on horror as a genre, but there was a time where it was kind of looked at as, like they called it weird fiction. Sci-fi and horror was considered like odd or off the cuff or not serious type of writing. And so Lovecraft was one of the earlier pioneers of just that particular type of writing. And as I'm kind of looking at, so I did a quick Google search and kind of found some information about him to help guide what I'm going to discuss. He was born into affluence, which makes perfect sense, which also makes sense why he was so kind of put to the forefront, because I'm sure that there were other authors around that same time that were also writing weird fiction and horror fiction, but they weren't as seminal, as pivotal in the space because they were not pushed forward likely. So wealth definitely plays a part, but also race. And so I want to talk about it because one of the conversations that's happening is how virulently racist H.P. Lovecraft was, to the point where he actually wrote a poem, and the poem was called On the Creation of Niggers. I may read it, I'm not sure, but that's what the poem was called. He wrote it in 1912. He was born in 1890, so in 1912 he would have been early 20s. Is that right? Is my math right? Because I don't math well. Let's see. I'm calculating this legitimately. 1912 minus 1890 would make him, he would have been 22. So a 22-year-old, essentially, in our day and time, a 22-year-old is considered really young, kind of a kid and immature. But in that day and time, a 22-year-old could very likely have, 3 kids, a house, a household, a family, be like fully living as a fully functioning adult. I mean, Lovecraft passed away when he was 46, which might have been deemed around average, around that time, like people just lived shorter lives. And so at 22 he's like a grown man. So he writes this poem. But also, if you look at the themes in his books, there's definitely, you can tell that he was racist, he was anti-Semitic, even though his wife was Jewish. So, he was definitely not a person that we want to hold up in esteem as an individual. However, and I'm saying however, because one of the things that I think is important to note is that while he was such an awful racist, as a lot of people from that time were, what he contributed to the culture with his work inspired so many different authors and artists and creators of horror, but also just probably just pulp fiction, just like the left of center type of work. And so because of that, his name, I think, will always pop up in some spaces because of that. However, it's really cool, and I'll definitely talk about it more when I talk about the show, that this show that is black AF, because it which I enjoy, and some people have said like it's kind of a kiss off to him being such a racist individual, to have this black show that, you know, they use his name. I mean, you know, all of that. I think that's really cool. So I wanted to, I guess, just do kind of a general intro and a primer about Lovecraft, because the themes and the things that he created and kind of was a big part of his writing will constantly come up when we discuss Lovecraft Country. It just will. It's considered Lovecraftian, which is like a type of storytelling. The biggest thing that he's most known for is his Cthulhu mythos. And so I'm having a hard time saying that because it is often mispronounced. And I actually found a video, and I'll link it below, where someone walks you through the correct way to pronounce it. And I also heard it on, so there's a podcast that goes with the series Lovecraft Country, and one of the ladies on there said, actually, because what most people either pronounce it Cthulhu or Cthulhu, or maybe even Cthulhu, however, but she said it's really pronounced Cthulhu. And I found a video, and the guy kind of said it the same way, because I actually forgot what she said. So nonetheless, that is the mythos that he created with his work. And it's really about, you know, like creatures and the world beyond the world in which we live. So it's like we live in this world, but it's just a veil, because there's another world and another element of not necessarily society, but of the world, like where you have creatures and, you know, these things that you could never ever conceive of, because they just fall so far outside of the realm of our current reality, that, you know, people might lose their mind if they really think about it, or it becomes this all-encompassing thing that just kind of slowly takes over, you know, what you think and who you are. And it's a very kind of slithery, kind of creaturey approach. And he also has, you know, that's kind of the thing that he's most known for. And so that plays out a lot in the show. However, I was thinking about it because I wanted to kind of talk about him, his mythos, where he kind of came from. But I thought it was important because I was mentioning that I wanted to possibly do a video, and my boyfriend, and I was saying, you know, he's a racist, but we have to kind of, it's a both and, not an either or. And it's a both and in that, yes, he's a racist, but, and I can't really say but, yes, he's a racist, period, full stop. His work and the themes of his work have inspired so many authors that you can almost lose him if you are not studying it. You can lose him in the work and just know about the theme. It's just like when, you know, something becomes so much a part of the culture that people don't actually know where it originated. One really well-known thing, you know, if you talk to Gen Z or millennial and, you know, you say bye Felicia, they will laugh, and, you know, it's known to be a slang term that's kind of like a kiss off to people. But some of those kids don't know that it originated from the movie Friday, where there was a character on there named Felicia, and she was always asking for something, and so it was always like, bye Felicia, like I don't have time, you know, and that was how it was said. And so that's the impetus of that's where it came from. But I would say the kids, they don't know that. And so that's kind of how the themes of Lovecraft are also kind of have permeated culture, especially horror culture. There's so people who were inspired by Lovecraft and the themes and the work that he did with the Cthulhu mythos are such big names in and of themselves that you don't even know unless you do dig a deeper dive about Lovecraft. And that is kind of where you definitely cannot separate the man from his racism and his art, because it's a part of it. It's woven into the stories when you read them. But what you can begin to notice is that the themes and the way his approach to horror was adapted by authors who aren't virulently racist, who, you know, now some of them probably are, but not all of them, you know, I'm not calling them, not all of them are. They're Black authors, they're white, you know, different authors who also have been inspired by the work, which is where we can kind of get to the both and of, and acknowledging that Lovecraft was a virulent racist, and it's fantastic having a very Black show hold his name. That's wonderful. It's a very great kind of kiss off for that. But also realizing that, you know, I did a little Google to see like who are some of the authors who cite Lovecraft as inspiration. And so the reason why I learned about Lovecraft was not because I was so intrigued by Lovecraft. It was because I am a big fan of Edgar Allan Poe's work, who I actually will probably do some research. I might do a video about Poe, just to learn a little bit more, who could also possibly be a virulent racist, because during that time, if you were a white man or a white person, 9 times out of 10, you had some type of forward-facing racism, because that's what was that was part of culture, and for various reasons. So, and kind of how people just related and believed. And so I, growing up, was a big fan of Poe and read a lot of Poe. And in telling someone who was a horror person that, they were like, oh, you like Poe, have you ever heard of Lovecraft? And I hadn't. I didn't hear about Lovecraft until I was, you know, an adult. And I was like, oh, and then I got introduced to him and his themes and kind of all of that. But it still was Poe who I was a fan of. And then also, he's inspired Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, George R.R. Harris, I think I said that name right, George R.R. Martin, sorry, George R.R. Martin, I'm just gonna Google to double check. Yeah, George R.R. Martin, who are all major artists who have done like these really big works that really contribute to culture. And so it's important to kind of realize how Lovecraft's creation have permeated culture, to where you can recognize that yes, he was a racist, and his work has, you know, seeped into the works of other artists who continue to create the culture and to continue to inspire authors like me. I mean, if you look behind me, there's a Stephen King book there. There's 2, and they're huge, and I love, like, I've read so many of Stephen King books, and I'm a big fan of his work and his approach. So it's kind of like focusing on the themes, and that still doesn't negate the fact that him being a racist is true. And so I wanted to do a quick video just to kind of talk about him, talk about that, just straightforward, you know, flat-footed, straightforward, without kind of talking around it, because I want to dive more into the show and do videos about it, because I just think it's cool and I look forward to doing it. But I wanted to kind of introduce him, talk about his awful poem about Black people, and how his work, him directly, can definitely be appropriately denigrated. I found an article that I don't know I can't say her name. Enede Okafor. I'm killing it. I'm destroying it. And as someone with a name like Ashia, it hurts my spirit. But she wrote, kind of has been very vocal about Lovecraft's racism, but there was an award I think that she won because she's another dope fantasy sci-fi writer that I really like, and she won an award, and the award is a bust of him. And so, but the award has since changed. The actual trophy has changed for that particular organization. It's no longer a bust of him. So I think we can still appreciate how we benefited from this person who was a racist, terrible person, while still saying yes, and that we're a terrible racist person. And so we're not going to have a bust of him as the award, but we will take what he did for the horror, fantasy, sci-fi genre with giving it more kind of public facing support. We will take that and we will benefit from that. And so that's kind of the both and of it, and how we're not separating him from it, because we're not saying go out and buy his books, even though, I mean, he's long dead, and so I don't even know how that works when it comes to the money, but we're saying buy the books of the people who took the work, learned from it, and aren't virulent, racist, terrible, awful people. And so that also can apply in other situations where you have people who do bad things, who are either predatory or, you know, do things where they prey on other people, but they contribute to the culture. You can appreciate the contribution to the culture and how other, you know, creative people took that contribution and built on it, while still saying, but you were still a terrible, awful person who did terrible, awful things that are predatory. And so without saying any specific names, that's kind of the point. And that was what my boyfriend had asked me. He was like, well, if we're going to talk about H.P. Lovecraft as a both and, then what about these particular people? And that was essentially kind of how I explained it. That's how I view it. And so we're not going to dismiss it, but we are going to take and benefit from the benefits of it. We're going to use it to has a benefit to grow and build and expand, which I find wonderful, because his themes and name are helming an Afrofuturistic, I think would be considered Afrofuturism. It's Afro-dystopian for sure story, which I find dope. So I will be doing more videos about Lovecraft Country and talking about the episodes. I'm not going to be doing a race for time. So I'm going to take my time to watch it, take notes, kind of really do a deep dive, because I'm not trying to compete with people who get the screeners in advance, because I don't. It's not the life I live. That's not where I am. Now, maybe next season I will get on that list, and then things might shift a little bit as far as how fast it goes out. But right now I'm doing it because I am a fan of horror sci-fi. I'm a fan of a lot of the actors on this show, and I am a fan of just everything that it represents, and so I want to talk about it, and that's where we are. So my day 21 of VEDA, I guess it's kind of an intro, a jumping off point to a longer set of videos that are going to go beyond VEDA. So I hope, if you haven't watched it, I think everyone should watch it. It's a really good, very well done show. It is scary though, and funnily enough, which I'll talk about more when I talk about the first episode, but a lot of the fear that came up wasn't because of the monsters. It wasn't because of the creatures. There were monsters, they just weren't creatures, they were human. And so I think that's also why it's important to watch. So if you are not a fan of horror, then you could definitely look at it from a historical perspective, and, you know, look at it during the day, and do like a thing that I do sometimes, because I don't always like watching horror movies right before I go to sleep, because like I might dream about this, and I don't want to dream about whatever horrible thing I just watched. And so I like to look at palate cleanser things. So either I might watch, you know, a rom-com, or an animated, like a happy, peppy animated project, or straightforward comedy, something that I call palate cleanser, which is like the whole point of this is feel good. That's the point, to erase, or kind of not maybe erase, but to cleanse your palate from the more strongly flavored horror that you might have seen. So that's what I'd recommend for Lovecraft. If you're not a horror fan, watch it either during the day, or if you do find yourself watching it later in the evening, make sure you have enough time to watch a palate cleanser afterwards, so then you can go to bed and enjoy the art without being afraid. That's my tip, and I'll probably give that tip multiple times because I think it's a good one, because I use it myself and I'm a horror fan. I actually enjoy horror and watch it on purpose. So I did want to talk about Lovecraft, and just who he was to the culture, what he meant, and also kind of set the tone for the series where I'm going to talk about Lovecraft Country. I'm excited because it was such a great first episode to get that started. I'll share some links down below just about how to pronounce Cthulhu, about Lovecraft, just so you can learn about him and the Cthulhu mythos. It's such a hard, I have to look up the etymology of that word, like what language that is, because that is not standard English. It feels, I don't know, like what part of the country. I'm curious, like, did that come from? It's interesting because that pronunciation is really making it hard for me. But I'll share some links to the Wikipedia for Lovecraft, the Wikipedia about the Cthulhu mythos, the article, the blog post that I found about the poem that I'm not going to read. I don't want to read it. I will just link to the blog post below. And what are your thoughts? Did you see Lovecraft Country? Are you gonna watch it? Have you been hearing good things about it and have decided to bookmark it? Where are you with it? I would love to know, and join me as I cover it and share my thoughts, feedback, and experience watching it as a Black woman horror fan, because my perspective is definitely gonna factor in. So that's my video for VEDA day 21 or 21, depending on which direction. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for coming with me on this journey to create content consistently. It's been an interesting conversation, and so I look forward to the next time that we are able to talk again. Bye.